you graduate high school. Do you go to college? And
So this is part of my story, actually. I was sick as a child, very sick. And back then, there wasn't internet, hardly cable or video games. The thing back then for me as a kid was a radio. And I was so sick that I ended up with a grant-a-wish. And my grant-a-wish was not to go to Disney World or anything like that. I wanted to meet the guy from the morning show at the radio station that I grew up listening to, B104 in Baltimore. And I did that. And his name was Big Don O'Brien. And when I got better, I'm 5 or 6 years old, they take me to the radio station and I'm like mesmerized by the buttons and the things. So, I'm 5 or 6 and I'm helping them push the buttons and all this stuff. And I'm working there one time a month, every month for a few years, just to have me on the show to follow up and stuff like that. So when I turned 13, there was this thing called the Capital Kids Radio Network, which was Radio Oz, which was right before Radio Disney. And they were having an open audition in Washington, D.C. And we had stayed in touch. My family had stayed in touch with Big Don O'Brien from the radio station. And it was kind of a big deal. It was in the newspaper and stuff. And Big Don thought at 13, I would be really good because they were casting for kids. And so with his blessing and help, I was able to get that gig at 13. And I was on the Radio Oz Kids Network across 100 AM radio stations from 13 to 15. We were all AM stations. They were all playing Weird Al Yankovic and the Olsen Twins and all this stuff. It was kids. It was a kids station.
Yeah.
And then I went on at 15 to try and part-time in real radio, which was actually a thing back in the 90s. And I had a radio career till I was in my late 20s. And that continued to take me all over the country. And I started in Ocean City, Maryland full-time. And then I went to DC, Atlantic City, Philadelphia, Greensboro, North Carolina, just all up and down the East Coast until I almost got in big trouble. So I had to get out of radio. The big trouble came much later. Yeah. But like they say on WKRP, I was in a different town every 9 months to a year, having the time of my life. But I was on the radio that time. And so that's what I did basically in lieu of college, taking college classes, eventually finishing a degree on my own, and getting another one in prison. But I did the radio thing until 2005.
Okay. Yeah. And then after radio, well, you said trouble kind of started happening. What was the early trouble?
The early trouble was in radio was this thing called payola, where I ended up working my way up in commercial top 40 radio stations to position either called some music director positions, some assistant program director positions, where those positions have influence on what's played on the radio. And because I started off so young in Baltimore, I was a major market I grew up in major market radio. So when I became an influential person in the radio, record reps would pay the music directors and the assistant program directors and the program directors to get their songs on the radio. That's how it happened. Elliot Spitzer, who was the AG in New York at the time, prosecuted everyone that did this. And I had friends that went to prison over this. So as they started going to prison and started getting prosecuted, I got out of radio completely. I was taking thousands of dollars to get songs on the radio, whether it be I never took drugs, and my mom is thankful for that because that could have been a really disaster for me. Yeah. But
dinners, material, clothes, all types of stuff,
cash,
yeah,
trips. RCA was big on electronics. Sony was big on electronics, and it's I didn't think about it. I didn't really process it out until I went to prison that this was criminal thinking because it was the norm. And the same thing happens in the pharmaceutical business. Pharmaceutical reps go take the doctors out and the office managers, and they take them out to conferences, and they pay for the hotels and the airplanes and the meals and the extra spending money and outfits and all this stuff. I mean, it happens every day right now today. some people call it capitalism. Some people call it crime. There's a really thin line. But, so my best friend growing up, who's still my best friend now and still in the radio business, and during this time with Elliot Spitzer and the radio thing and the payola, he ends up Exhibit G in the exhibits, right? So we all started calling him that, Exhibit G. He luckily didn't get any prison time or anything like that, but they have emails and voicemail recordings of just us asking for extra trips and who's going on the trip. Well, I'm going. I lived at one point I worked in Myrtle Beach at Mix 97.7, and I wanted to go home for Thanksgiving. And I put it out there, the first record rep that calls up that's going to get me a plane ride home for Thanksgiving's got this ad, whatever it was. It's how songs like Chumbawamba Tub Thumping got on the radio.
So you learned how to wheel and deal at a very young age.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you kind of grew up with this. It was around you. Uh-huh. You knew how to work the system, play the game.
Yeah.
After radio, what do you end up doing?
So after it's all kind of groups together. After radio, I started selling cell phones and working at T-Mobile. And I was real good at sales. I mean, that's how I ended up in my crime. I'm a real good salesperson. So, I had great numbers. I caught the eye of some people that were high up in the company and, would go out to the employee awards things and all this stuff. So in 2005, this is 2005, 2 years before Android and Apple and iPhone. In 2005, Google starts floating the idea for the Android phone. The very first Android phone looks like a BlackBerry with an Android screen, and it's like resistive touch screen, so you can't even hardly move the screen. And the store that I'm at, because of I'm so high up in the store, I get to play with the sample. So they send a prototype out, and I'd make a video, and I throw it on a what's called a blogger page at this time. Blogger was a thing back then. It was before WordPress. Made like a blogger page, and they were going to call it Android. Everybody knew that. So I made up this thing called the droidguy.blogger.com and just started writing about it, and people were noticing it. And this is 2005, or 20 years ago. Wow, 20 years ago. And by 2007, when the G1, which is the first Android phone, actually comes out, I've moved the site to thedroidguy.com, and I've created the very first Android blog in the world. So from 2007 to 2011, it took off. I sold that site for millions of dollars to an Indian firm called Interclick Media out of Mumbai in 2011. And I used that money to start a venture fund, which eventually became what evolved into my crime.
Okay. So you make a few $1 million selling this website in 2011 to an Indian firm?
Yeah, they're out of Mumbai.
Okay. Got it.
It's an asset only sale. All they're buying is the name and the content on the site.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So, all right. So you now go on, you have this firm of your own now that you've created as a startup with the capital that you got paid.
Well,
for
so I did
a
couple other things. I had the Droid Guy. I sold it, got that money. I was pissing through it. It's like, people don't understand when you have that kind of money and you see the other people, it's easy to drop $10,000, $20,000 on a weekend or a day or whatever. During the Droid Guy time, I meet somebody that I marry, a woman, and we have a kid, and that's my daughter. And I moved to Alabama, and where the ex-wife is from. And so I started another blog specifically about startups that are outside of Silicon Valley. Because at this time in 2011, everybody's talking about the Valley and they're talking about New York. So it was called Niblets. It was the voice of startups everywhere else. At the same time, I become a regional champion for something called Startup America, which was an Obama initiative to spur, I'm wearing this hat, but talking about Obama, an Obama initiative to spur entrepreneurial growth in the flyover states. And so it was just a bunch of all over the country kind of places that were having events to celebrate entrepreneurship. I was very heavily into that. And I was living in Auburn, Alabama. And Auburn, Alabama was a little bit too small for what I was trying to do. So I was actually commuting back and forth to Memphis because I needed a hub for what I was doing. And we took some economic development money from Memphis, and we were growing my Niblets brand in Memphis and helping the startup scene there and across the country through Startup America. When my daughter hit first grade, I didn't, and you're going to go through the same thing. When my daughter hit first grade, I didn't want to travel like that anymore. I wanted to be home. I wanted to go to daddy-daughter breakfast club and daddy-daughter date night and everything. Like me and my kid were like this. And
I respect that, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I didn't move away, but I stayed home full time in Auburn, Alabama. And my daughter's grandmother on my ex-wife's side was very heavily into her church. And one of the people that she was in the church with was the administrator for something called the Auburn Research Technology Foundation, which was an incubator at Auburn University. So she introduced us, and that guy asked me if I would run Niblets out of that incubator. And I said, sure. And then eventually I evolved into their entrepreneur in residence because of my experience and then helping the college kids with whatever they were doing. So this becomes very heavily in tech transfer. Basically, if you're outside of Stanford, if you're a kid at a college and you make a startup while you're in college, pretty much whatever you make is most typically normally the property of the college. So it goes through something called tech transfer. But there were these kids that wanted to do these ideas outside of tech transfer, which launched the idea for what eventually became how I got in trouble. So I'm the entrepreneur in residence at the Auburn Research Technology Foundation. I'm talking to the guy who's the administrator. He's saying that we're probably going to get more of the kids involved if we take it out of the college. So next door to Auburn is a small, very small town called Opelika. It's a railroad town. But the unique thing about Opelika in 2011, now think about this, 2012, is that they are the 6th town in the country to get symmetrical 1 gigabit internet. And the reason for this in Opelika, in Chattanooga, in Kansas City is because they changed the power grid and they need the symmetrical gigabit internet to move the meters to the houses without having to bring the meter guys out there. So that's what allows them to read the meters back at the meter reading station or whatever it's called at the power company.
Makes it seamless. Yeah.
Yeah. It makes it seem exactly. So now in Chattanooga, in Kansas City, and in little Opelika, Alabama, which is a town of like 32,000, they have the gig pipe going to the house for the meter. And now you can turn it on for residential for your house. And this is 1 gig when it's first coming out.
1 gig.
1 gig when it's first, but at that time it's the fast. It's super fast.
Yep.
So, we decide that we want to try to go to Opelika. It's only got 30,000 people. A lot of the industry is left after the economic shakeup of 2008. So I talked to the mayor. I talked to the city council. We agree on a place to launch my own incubator that we call the Roundhouse because it's a railroad town. And not only that, we get spiffed by the city because the city owns the internet. So we get this internet for free. I get the 1 gigabit internet in my building for free. So now we can attract big data startups to Opelika with the promise of the free 1 gigabit pipe. And this proposition works. So we open up a facility called the Roundhouse in a 35,000 square foot old Woolworths location from the 60s. When we go into this place, we start renovating it, and we left a lot of it intact, but we unveil signs that say colored bathroom. Like, this is how old school this is. And it had an old lunch counter and everything. So that we made the lunch counter into a snack bar, and we offer co-working and mentorship and incubation for startups. And it becomes a thriving environment. Like when you watch me on Generation Hustle on HBO or on Scam Goddess on Hulu, you see that we actually set out to do what we said, and we did it for like a year and a half before I started stealing the money. And we have at one point 30 startup companies working out of there. They're all primarily young people in their early 20s. Anything from web design firms to, we had a company that was making vinyl stickers for laptops for college kids that worked as an advertising platform to get around exclusivity deals. And then we had a vending machine, a first aid vending machine that was brought to us by a kid at the local middle school. So that was the launch of Roundhouse, and Roundhouse is where I ultimately got in trouble.
Can you walk us through the fraud that took place and what exactly the scam was? So you said for about a year and a half, it was legit, and you guys were giving what you promised people you would give them. When do things kind of paint a picture for us over the first year and a half and then walk us through what had happened?
Absolutely. So this is a really good question because when Scam Goddess came out, me and another guy you interviewed, Jason Walterbeck, who's sometimes co-hosts my own podcast, we did a live podcast when Scam Goddess is out. So we're talking about it on TikTok and doing the live thing. And he asked me, like, I don't understand what the scam was. Well, people don't understand what the scam was because I didn't set out to do a scam. It's not like, hey, let me put this Ponzi together and try this. I legitimately started this thinking that it was going to go the right way. And then it went off the rails. So I moved from out of the Auburn Research Technology Foundation into Opelika. I opened up the Roundhouse. People start coming in. We're renting office space. It's like $200 for an office, $100 for a desk. We have a community. Our facilities open 24 hours a day. We do the free snack thing like they do at other co-working spaces and at Google. We have a game room with video games and air hockey and foosball. It's a lively place, and it's lively 24 hours. The coders from some of these startups are coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I'm also trying to do incubation. So with incubation, what you typically do is you do a small seed investment with the startup to hold their piece of equity. And then the rest of everything else they get is services. So we would entice a startup to come to Opelika to the Roundhouse where we have the 1 gigabit internet. So that's something that they need. So we're looking for big data startups that need fast internet. And this is at a time when 1 gigabit was the fastest you could get. Most people were getting 30 to 100 megs. And so the enticement for them is come to our space for the internet, come to our space for help with your startup. We have web designers, we have Android app developers, we have Java developers. We're going to give you all the services that you need and some cash for a piece of the equity. Typically the cash is like 10 to 20,000 or 5,000, whatever it is. On the other side of that, to get that cash, what we do is we have investors in the community come in. Now, I'm trying to run a legitimate venture fund and incubator. So one of the things that people get wrong in the TV shows that we do, that I've done, is that this is not grandma's money in between the mattress. In order to invest with me, you have to be an accredited investor, which means you have to have $1 million of equity outside of your home. So everybody now it's wrong that I ended up stealing the money, and I feel bad about that. And it's wrong that I commingled the money, which I feel bad about. I've learned my lesson, but it wasn't like I was ripping grandma off or calling people saying, hey, come in and get this. They talked to somebody and Scam Goddess is like, yeah, Kyle's people came and asked us for money, said we were going to make more money. No, that didn't happen at all. People legitimately invested into the Roundhouse. They were supposed to get equity, which they did. The business model at first was I was going to hold 50% of the equity. The investors were going to hold the other 50. I was valuing it at $10,000 per share. So I was raising $500,000. I raised the $500,000. Now, a lot of that money is in the bank, but some of the money is being used to lure the startups into the space, pay the rent, pay the electricity bill, pay for the web development, we have to pay for a bit. Businesses cost money to run, pay our staff, all that stuff. So we're using it for legitimate business expenses. I haven't stolen dime one yet. I've done some things like pay for dinners, but everybody's business owner does that. And I could probably justify it 6 ways to Sunday. But, at this point in time, for the first year until I raised the $500,000, we're good. And then I think about a month or two later, a guy comes in and he really wants to get in. He's practically begging me to get in, and he wants to invest $125,000. That's going to affect my equity chart a lot. And I start realizing that. So I start looking at it like, okay, who are my investors? Who's going to side with me if we have a problem? Because that's what it is. It's about votes and ownership and stuff. The ownership I can deal with. I just need to know everyone's going to vote with me. So I'm okay to let the guy in and get my 50% down. And then another guy comes in, and then another guy comes in. And three things are going on in my head. Number one is, I don't really want to let anybody down. I mean, we could use all the money. We could, because the more money we have, the more things we can do. I was taking some of these startups to Silicon Valley to show them off, to other events and things like that. That's how you spur excitement. So it's not bad to have more money, but I'm losing all my equity. And eventually I'm not going to have any equity. And eventually I do run out of equity and start overselling. And that's, that in itself is a crime. And then I start, when I get that far, it's just over with. And I'm just doing stupid, totally horrible, reckless things. Thinking that and hoping and praying that one of my startups becomes like the next big thing and I can right all these wrongs. And if that does happen, I can right all these wrongs. So, they position it when they don't understand, when you have no experience in this arena, as like, oh, well, Kyle was promising that one of them would hit. I never promised it. If I had decided to go to trial, the equity agreement that everybody signed, like they were signing their life away. I could do whatever I want with the money practically. There was 6 or 7 clauses in our equity agreement about risk. Of course, it does not cover me stealing the money and using it for my own stuff. But, we would have had a hard time in court. Probably lose because everybody loses at a federal trial. But I wasn't about that life. I wasn't about to hurt people more than I did. One of the hardest parts of this whole thing for everybody was we became the epicenter of activity in the small town. We were on the TV news and in the newspaper every time we sneezed. And at one point I became a mentor for something called the Young Entrepreneurs Academy in Opelika Middle School. And so I'm also a judge for their contest. And I meet all the kids that are pitching their ideas, like baked goods companies. And one kid made a hunting vest. And the kid that won the first year, his name was Taylor Rosenthal. His original idea was to set up like a pop-up tent at a soccer tournament to sell first aid supplies to the bystanders and other kids out there that hurt themselves while they're there for the soccer tournament. The idea makes sense in your mind, but paying somebody to sit out there for the whole time, you're going to lose your ass. But the kid had spunk and the idea made sense, but we had to have a better vehicle to sell the stuff. So all of the kids, the lady from, if you ever watched the Scam Goddess, she's like, well, you solicited Taylor. I didn't. We were the epicenter of everything. The kids came because of the video games. And, we had 3D at this time, this is 2012. We have video games. We have 3D printers. We have 1 gigabit internet. We have Xboxes and PlayStations hooked up. So the teenagers come in and play video games there to test out the cool internet. And Opelika Power Services, who supplied the internet, would tell people, you want to see the internet in action, go to the Roundhouse. They have it set up there. They have the movies and the video games. So like we were the epicenter of the whole town. So when we went there, oh my goodness, Kyle from the Roundhouse is there. And at the end of the original pitch event, all the kids came up to us and were like, hey, how can we become a Roundhouse startup, blah, blah, blah. So we were going to pick one to be a Roundhouse startup and invest in and do the whole equity thing, which was Taylor's. It's called RecMed First Aid Kits. And
it's a vending machine. So you basically take away the money you would pay that person to sit there all day. Is Correct. That what you did?
And so what we did was I got him in touch with a guy named Greg, and I can't for the life of me remember his last name, but he invented the Eco ATM that where you can put your cell phone in. And so Greg talks to Taylor a bunch of times. And we actually, I don't know if you Googled it or anything, we actually made the machine. And we had our designers make the machine, that Roundhouse designers, not Taylor. We had our designers make the machine, from the automation and the robotics to the Android interface to everything. He had a lot of influence on it. He said whatever he wanted it to do, but we made the machine. And then we had some guys from Auburn University help, and we took a working machine on tour with Taylor, and we helped him craft his pitch. And he won the Techstars competition at CES that year against people that had millions of dollars in R&D in their project. So the reason I say that and so defensively is that, there's this idea that I use this kid to prop up my scheme, and it was all a scam. And I took this kid's vending machine idea. No, I gave the kid our vending machine idea so that he could have a company. And yeah, we used a lot of it, and it was his original idea to do the standing outside the tournaments thing. And we let him have that. It was his company, but there would be no Rec Med vending machine without Kyle Sandler in the Roundhouse. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't justify what happened afterwards, but it wasn't like I robbed the kid. And he admitted, obviously didn't admit on the TV show, but afterwards, when I'm on the run and I'm still talking to them a little bit, even his parents are telling me, and he's, I guess, in 10th grade at this time, he's had a entrepreneurial crash course between going to Techstars and TechCrunch and going and winning CES to making the final cut for Shark Tank. He's had more entrepreneurial experience before he get 10th grade than most college kids get, mm-hmm. which there's real value in that. Mm-hmm. But for me, what happened was, I became so messed up in my own head and started making such terrible decisions and digging myself deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper till I couldn't climb out of the hole anymore. And I heard a lot of people that had believed in my idea. And the most horrible thing is that I believed in my idea. And I know that if I would have slowed down like everybody told me to do, then we'd still have the Roundhouse today. And we would have had a great exit probably with Taylor and some other companies.
So you just mentioned you went on the run.
Yeah.
Now, can you take us through the madness of you oversell your equity? You now have all this money that came in. You guys have monthly expenses that you're spending it on. Absolutely. I'm assuming you dip into it for your own personal use.
Absolutely. I mean, I was way commingling.
What were you buying? What were you doing with the money for yourself?
At first, I justifiably had one car, and I wanted a Hummer really bad. So, and this is 100% legit. So I went out and I bought a H2 Hummer, and then I had it wrapped. So I'm good. It's wrapped Roundhouse. We drive it to all the events. Fine. Great. Everybody does that. It's my company vehicle. But then I wanted a Porsche and another Porsche and another Porsche and then and a Maserati. And eventually there was 24 cars and 3 houses.
Okay. So what is going on in your head? Stress, or are you just not giving a fuck?
Both. Like, it's like you stress out, and then crap, I'm going to get in trouble anyway. Let's just ride this out until I do.
When do you go on the run?
Okay, so I'll walk you through it. So I'm in Opelika. And at this point in time, by definition, what I have done is not a Ponzi scheme. Remember, I didn't set out to do this. But then I had this brilliant idea that if I opened up a second Roundhouse in Mobile, Alabama, and with the success of Taylor and the original Roundhouse, I could sell the equity for 2 to 3 times more. And if I do that, then I can use that money to pay these people in Opelika back, and we can keep going. When I opened Mobile, Alabama, then I started a Ponzi scheme, because I opened Mobile strictly to pay the people in Opelika back, although the people in Mobile had no idea that's why I did it. I opened Mobile in May of 2016, and I started spending more and more time in Mobile and less time in Opelika. I didn't want to face the people that I was at this point in time ripping off. I mean, I heard a lot of people I couldn't stand it. I didn't want to be there. And I was, using whatever funds I could get to fund the Mobile mission to make it look as good as Opelika so that I could raise more money. I was cheating on my wife with a much younger woman down there. who I had moved into a house that I had bought down there, the third house. So I was down in Mobile all the time. My going up and back and forth from Opelika to grab my kid and running into the Opelika Roundhouse as least often as possible. I come up in November for our annual potluck in Opelika and to celebrate my birthday and to reassure the investors everything's going to be okay. They're starting to have a lot of questions. I'm lying through my teeth that, I'm telling them everything's going to be okay. I've got more money coming in. If you want out, I'll let you out. I've got this big annuity coming in. I'll pay you after my birthday, which was a lie just to buy more time to get them off my back at the time. So then on December 6th of 2016, I got a target letter from the FBI. And it said, please come to the Mobile field office of the FBI on December 20th so we can discuss these allegations and, get to the bottom of this. So I get this letter on December 6th. They want to see me on December 20th. I left town. I closed the Roundhouse down that night, left town on December 7th, and was apprehended in June of 18.
June of 2018. So you were on the run for a year and a half.
18 months, yeah.
Where did you go on the run?
To Texas.
Where in Texas?
Bryan, Texas.
Where's that?
It's like by College Station where Texas A&M is.
Yep.
We were living in a ranch that was literally next to Chuck Norris's. And we were pretty much living off grid, but I was getting bored. Eventually the way that I got caught was I was getting bored. So I was trying to flex a little and get involved in their startup scene. And I was realizing that I wasn't like FBI's most wanted number one. I was able to do a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. I made friends or thought I had made friends with this guy named Alex who owned a car lot called the Corner Lot in Bryan, Texas. And, I had invested a little money with him that I had left over from when I stole the money from leaving. And there was a car that I wanted there at his lot. And he was chopping cars up in the back. But I didn't care because I was wanted in Alabama. So why would I care what he's doing? But when he got caught, the very first thing he did was, I know a guy the FBI is looking for in Alabama, because I had disclosed who I was using an assumed name, but to him, I told him like the real story because he was my friend. And he told the FBI and set me up. And both of the documentaries I've been on have the body cam footage from my arrest, which is at his lot. I come back that day in June. I think it was the 16th of 2018. I come back to his lot the day in June to look at this other car. And the police officer was like, hey, are you Kyle Sandler? And I'm like, yeah. And they swarm me like I'm, America's Most Wanted.
So they bring you in for questioning.
No, I'm done. I mean, I'm coming in on a warrant, so I'm going to be extradited.
Okay. And then what was the process like after that?
So I went to the Brazos County Jail in Texas, and I stayed there for about a month while they were working out the extradition back to Alabama. And at this point in time, they're extraditing me what's on state charges. So I do something called the extradite buses. So if I would have been extradited by the feds, I would have gone into federal custody and flown. But on the extradite bus, you actually get on a van and they take you all across the country for days and days and days, and you sleep and eat and everything on the van. So it takes me another week to get from the Texas jail to a county jail in Alabama, back in Opelika in Lee County, Alabama. When I get there, it's like July 12th of 2018 or so. And at this point in time, John McAfee has been arrested and is just waiting in Barcelona. They're trying to build a case against him. The FBI wants to talk to me about John McAfee, and they're basically willing to trade me for John McAfee. Like,
just to connect the dots here for everyone, you worked with John McAfee in what, 2016?
From late 2014 to 2016.
Give us 15 seconds on what you did for him really quick, just so the audience understands.
So he had started his own incubator back in the day, a virtual incubator.
Okay.
And he wasn't doing any incubation. He wasn't doing the investment thing. He was doing the opposite.
Okay.
For $20,000, a startup could incubate with John. And the big draw for them was you could use his name. And he would talk about you on Twitter, and, you know, he would come to your event or whatever. So you're buying his name. But he was also promising everything that we were promising. So he ended up with a startup that was threatening to go to the FBI, and through a mutual contact of ours, basically asked me if we'd take all his, they were called Future Tense Central. That was his startup, his incubator. Would we take on all the Future Tense companies and do a partnership with him? Of course, I'll do a partnership with John McAfee. I get the same benefit and I don't have to pay any money. And just briefly, so John comes, he's living in Tennessee. He commutes to Opelika every couple weeks to check on his startups that are now incubating with ours at the Roundhouse. And we get a call from a guy named Barry Honig out of Boca Raton, who is a very well-known penny stock investor. He's a pump and dumper. And Barry and his partner, I can't remember the other guy's name. Barry and his partner want to talk to John about a company called MGT Technologies, where they want him to become the CEO on paper so they can basically do what the startups were doing. And at that time, they're talking about $40 million. So they fly out to Auburn on a private jet and they meet with us for 2 days and then they fly back. And this is either 2014 or early 2015. They fly back down here and we don't hear from them for months. And John's like, how can we get these guys back on the tape? How can we get these guys back? You know, I'm doing everything. What had drawn them in was I had gotten John a cover story on USA Today when it was like the second coming of John McAfee. It's still there, on USA Today, right outside the Roundhouse. That's what attracted Mike Browser was the other guy's name. Mike Browser and Barry Honig from here, Boca Raton. And so we couldn't get them back to the table. So like 3 shots to the wind, man. We're just talking at this dinner. And me and another buddy were like, or I said, I'm like, man, you got to do something big, like run for president. Like this is how this came up for real. And he's like, run for president. And so he leaves and he goes back to Tennessee. Like at 6 o'clock the next morning, he calls up. He's like, what's it take to run for president? I said, I don't know, man. I was just joking. He's like, no, find out. Get somebody on it. So I had a guy who worked for me for many years named Andrew Thompson. He had worked for me at the Droid Guy and at Niblets, and he was working for me at the Roundhouse as a policy guy. And I said, listen, I need to know everything we need to know. I need to know everything about running for president by the end of the day. So he had a whole, dossier of what you need to do to run for president by the end of the day. And so we made a checklist, and he went up to Washington and filed for John to run for president on at that time, the Libertarian ticket.
All because you mentioned it at a dinner,
as a way
jokingly,
as a way to get these guys back to the table. It worked. So after Andrew files John's paperwork, with the election commission in DC, every national media in the country comes to the Roundhouse for a press conference, and John's running for president. And I mean, if it was Joe Schmo, they wouldn't have covered it, but it was John McAfee. It was crazy.
Yeah.
He was already wanted for murder in Belize.
Yep.
And, he
his next door neighbor or something like that, right?
His name was Gregory Falk. And he started McAfee Antivirus, which was a scam in itself, and, sold McAfee Antivirus for what in 96 in 2025 money would be $7 billion. He pissed all his money away too.
So let's fast forward to you get extradited and they want information.
They want everything on John. They don't give a shit about Kyle.
Okay. So they don't want anything. Well, they do want you, but they're more interested in John McAfee. Right. What do you do from there?
Nothing.
You don't talk.
I
heard you ratted.
I've told.
No, I'm just kidding.
I've told this story on TikTok a lot of times. I did my TikTok lives. You want to know what I really did? I just told them a bunch of lies for 6 days because they were feeding me outside food. Every day we had McDonald's or pizza twice a day while I was telling them all these leads and all this stuff to chase down, all these stories. And by the 6th day, one of the FBI guys was like, you're just doing this for the food. I'm like, yep. They took me back to jail. But there was really not, John even told me. The funny thing is when I went on the run, he did a video on on Twitter, basically calling me the GOAT that I use all the time. And he called me one night after I went on the run. And he offered me $10,000 and a Beretta. He's like, you might need it. You might need this stuff. I mean, I took the money, but I didn't take the gun because I've never used a gun. And then, I kept in contact with his wife, Janice, and, he killed himself in 21 in a Barcelona jail right after the extradition thing happened. And then there's a crazy story about that. In February, this is on my first bid. In February of 22, John Swartz from the Wall Street Journal reached out to me on email and asked me if he could talk to me about John, because there were some questions about his estate and he was doing a story for Market Watch. And so I wrote him back and said, sure, because I'm talking to him on an illegal cell phone in prison. And so I call him and we do an interview. And this is like in the beginning of February of 2022. And so the interview gets published in Market Watch. It's still out there on the internet. And we're talking about John, nothing about Kyle or his crime, but just John. And I forget what my quote was, but this reporter writes, from a cell phone at a federal prison in Arkansas. Well, there's only one federal prison in Arkansas. And, cell phones are illegal. But that's what it says. Kyle Sandler speaking from a cell phone from a federal prison in Arkansas. So I don't think anything of it, and I pray that nothing's going to happen. So on Valentine's Day, 2022, which is a Monday, I get called to the lieutenant's office at 6:30 in the morning. And typically when you're going to get a disciplinary, it happens at 6:30 in the morning at change of shift at the lieutenant's office. So I, get all my stuff together, lock my locker, because I think I'm going to the SHU or segregation because of the cell phone. And I'm going to spend a month there at least. And then they're going to ship me somewhere else. And so I get down there to the lieutenant's office on February 14th, 22. And the lieutenant says, are you Sandler? And I said, yeah. He's like, do you have a ride home? And I said, you mean in January of 24? Because my out date at this time is January 20th, 24. He's like, no, this afternoon. So apparently my first step credit, and I had won a motion in court that I didn't know I won. And my first step credit had come in at the exact same time. And I was done on my first bid. So I had to go home that day. I couldn't go home that day, so they had to give me a bus ticket 2 days later. So I made it out February 16th. But so I'm thinking that they're calling me down to tell me I'm in trouble for this cell phone thing. And they're telling me I'm going home.
So you get out.
So I go.
Wow. 2 days later, you leave prison. Now, you are home for how long, and what happened with your violation?
So I'm home from February till August.
Okay.
And me and my probation officer were like oil and water.
Okay.
Everything I did was wrong. And I had asked my probation officer if I could set up a business that's similar to what I'm doing now. And she basically said, well, we frown upon that kind of thing, but I couldn't get a job. It's impossible to get a job if you have a felony in your record. I tried and tried. I mean, I was sending her, partially to be a smart ass, but partially to be covering my back. Every time I applied for something got turned down, I'd send it to her. So she's getting hundreds of emails a day. So I asked her if I can start my own business doing something very similar to what I'm doing now. And she says, yes, but you have to get a tax ID number. You have to get register with the Secretary of State. I need you to get office space, a landline, like a fax machine, a tax, you have to do like 15 things. And I guess in her mind, these 15 things were going to take months. So, I leave the probation office. Okay. I do these 15 things. I can completely do this, right? Yes. Do those 15 things and you can do it. I don't have to tell, just tell me when you're done. Okay, great. And you can do it. Fine. I call her from the office the next day. So this is not bode well with her because I think she thought it was going to take weeks to do this. And I'm doing what we're supposed to do. We're doing all the filings we need to do. We're helping to people. I'm keeping really, really, really good records. But I had a client that wasn't pleased with the results in court, so started bad mouthing me. And I guess did some research and got my probation officer's number and told her that I was fraudulently doing work, even though originally the same client said I did the best work in the world. He put a Facebook post about how great I was. I put it on TikTok. And so he called her And she told me I needed to shut the business down immediately. Well, I had motions in court. I can't just shut it down. I'm like, these people are going to be left in a lurch. So I beg her, hey, I won't take any more clients, but can I please wind down the ones that I've worked with? No, you need to shut it down immediately. Like, how on earth can I do that? That's crazy. So I say, okay, whatever. I don't do that. And she gets a court order from my judge. And then I don't do it again because I still have clients that are in court. I'm like, they're going to be screwed if I'm not helping them. And then I had one client that I was helping for whatever reason. She called my probation officer and said I was still working with her. And she locked me up for that. And I stayed in prison for 15 more months.
Okay. So you went back, you went to prison for 15 more months. And then when did you get out? 2024?
Yeah. March 20th, 24.
All right. So you've been out almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me ask you this. When you were younger, were your parents good at telling you no for certain things?
Yes. And I was good at trying to get past it.
Okay. Why were you so interested in getting past it? I mean, that is a kid's reaction. It is.
So this is something that I had actually written about in my journal about possibly writing a book. I think that psychologically it has to do with me being mixed race adopted. I'm mixed race adopted. I was raised in a white family. I'm obviously different. So it's very hard, in my opinion, and I've talked to a lot of mixed race adopted kids who've gotten in trouble with the law. It's very hard to explain that to make sense to somebody because yes, when you're adopted, you are picked by a family who loves you a lot, who loves you a great amount. My mom is so great. I talk to her every day still. But at the same time, there's a mother that gave you up. And regardless of the circumstances, the mother still gave you up. So there are some things in my mind and my psyche that are survival-ish in nature that are also criminal in nature. And then the other thing is, the other psychological part of me is that my Myers-Briggs is ENTJ, which is, I don't remember what the E and then the T and the J stand for, but it's the same Myers-Briggs as Steve Jobs and Al Capone. So the biggest criminals in the world and the biggest entrepreneurs in the world are ENTJ, which is extroverted. And I don't remember what the T and TJ are for. So I think that a lot of it goes, but me in my childhood, I was told no, but I was always trying to figure out a way past it. And, I've talked a lot. I remember doing a really good talk at Auburn, actually, about, a big sales thing is no means go, where you start fighting objections. But I was giving this conversation right as Me Too was coming up with a bunch of girls in the audience. And I'm telling people that no means go. Yep.
That is probably not the right time.
It was not the right thing to do. And it wasn't what I meant. I wasn't talking about.
I know what you meant.
With sex, I'm talking about getting over objections for sales or decisions.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of the programming that I took in self-search I did in prison was about like, okay, no means go till when? When do you stop? And I'm a lot better at stopping. A lot of the crime, like with the Roundhouse and with the getting in trouble in 22, it's all about getting over my head and the no means go thing. So at this point in time, I hired employees. So with my business now, I have employees and checks and balances and people that like double check me to the point where sometimes it's annoying.
Yeah.
But I have to have that in place because we're doing so well that if it could completely fall off the rails if I didn't have these fail safes in place. Accountability
too. Yeah. So I will say that I do commend you on noticing, the early childhood differences, acknowledging them. I can't speak from, being a different race as my parents, right. Or being adopted. And I couldn't imagine what that is like a mom giving up their child, whether it's because they didn't have, the financial means to do it or whatever it is. So I can't speak to that. And I commend you on being able to acknowledge that. But so for example, you did mention, you talked about when you were taking investments and these people had to have $1 million worth of assets outside of, what was it, their house or something?
Of their primary residence.
Of their primary residence, right. I felt like I heard a little bit of, well, we weren't ripping off, people who had only $100,000 in their bank. We were ripping off people who maybe had 7 figures in the bank. Now, do you know for a fact that you didn't put someone out on the street, a family out on the street that was, at one point that had 7 figures in their bank account?
No, I'm 100% sure of that. I didn't. The thing is, and because of that, because of the accredited investor piece, Lacey, who's the host of Scam Goddess, she said that when she interviewed investors of mine for the show that refused to be on camera, none of them asked about the money and none of them talked about the money. They talked more about like how likable I was and how I lured them in and how they thought we were friends.
Manipulation.
The manipulation. There were many of them. One guy in particular, he owned a really big, what do you call it? Extermination business. He gave me the keys to his condo in Panama City, and he gave me the keys to his lake house whenever I wanted. And so, I feel like we were really friends. I was going to say he thought we were friends. We were. I counted him as a friend, and then at the same time, I was robbing him, misappropriating his money, using his money with everybody else's money for stuff that I wasn't supposed to, regardless of when I actually did it.
Yeah. What have you been able to make amends to these people individually? I know there's financial.
There's a couple of issues on there. I couldn't before. See, when I went back to prison, I went on a probation violation, or they call it supervised release in the feds. And I did something that colloquially we call kill our paper, but I didn't have probation when I came out. So now I can talk to them. But while I was on paper, on probation and in prison, obviously I couldn't talk to any of those guys. And I have started dialogue with some of them. I saw one of them in town when I was in the halfway house. At this point in time, I'm no longer on supervision, so there's the incentive to go back to prison to have to pay my restitution is no longer there, but I do still pay. The problem is they're not getting their money, which is a whole nother issue with the government itself. I guess they wait until they have X amount collected or the whole amount collected. But if they're waiting to get the $2 million collected, there's going to be investors of mine and me possibly that could die before that happens. I think it should be an ongoing thing, really. But, I am paying, I pay a restitution amount per month on my own accord.
How much do you pay per month?
I'm not going to say, but I pay a decent amount.
Okay. Because you said your business is doing pretty well right now.
Yeah. It's more than I used to pay. But also I'm doing pretty well, but we're also putting part of the fail safes is having money saved up in case we have a problem. But yeah, we're paying I'm paying restitution a decent amount, more than I was paying on supervision, and I was paying $500 a month on supervision.
Yeah. So your child saw everything that had happened in prison twice. What are you doing? So I know you had said no means go when, your parents told you no when you were younger. You'd find ways to manipulate. And that kind of turned into, the fraud that was taking place. Now, what are you doing to break the chain so that your child doesn't repeat the same pattern?
The 8 years that she lived with her mother only, she's got a great head on her shoulders. We rarely speak right now. Hopefully.
So wait, you're saying that without her father in her life and her being with her mom, she had a great head on her shoulders. She gained a good head on her shoulders while she was with her mom and didn't have a dad?
She missed having a dad, obviously.
Yeah.
But in some ways I was a good parent. In other ways, I didn't give a fuck. Not about her, about like daddy would do whatever I wanted. And part of it was at that point in time, originally we had the droid guy money, and then we had this money I was stealing. Money was never an option. And, she would go ask her mom for something and come to me for something. And I'd do the same thing just because I don't know. I didn't think about things the way that her mom did.
Yeah.
And, basically because I think the uprooting her life had because of what I did, she's very cognizant of the decisions that I made and not doing things like that herself. I will tell you this. I will tell you that when she was a child, probably from your kid's age to about 9, she did the little white lie thing that most kids do. She probably inherited a lot of that from me. We made a conscientious decision to tell her where daddy went. A lot of my clients, go back and forth about this. It's a tough decision. So we told her from the jump that I was going to prison. And we told her from the jump that I was going to prison for lying. That was the overall reason I was going to prison. And my ex-wife, basically reported from the time she was 9 until 16 or 17, you couldn't get my kid to lie about anything. And that was because of what happened to me. So in that regard, she's got a great head on her shoulders.
That method I respect. Being honest with her that you went to prison because daddy was lying.
Yeah.
That because she picked up lying from you.
She did.
So now she knows that there are consequences when you lie.
Right.
I think I commend you on that.
Thank
you and
much.
your ex-wife and her mom. So why aren't you guys speaking today?
Because I did her mom dirty.
Okay.
There was a lot of cheating. We speak a little bit in the last, since I've been out this time.
Yeah.
But there was a time I was locked up from June of 18, and then think about that April during COVID. From June of 18 until April or May of COVID, my daughter and I talked, if not every day, every other day on the phone. It was like the highlight of her day. And then from that point until recently, nothing. And I didn't stop letters ever. And I didn't stop birthday cards. And I didn't stop birthday presents. I asked, there's a whole child support's a whole weird thing while you're in prison. And now she's 17, so it's not even an issue. But my ex-wife had basically said, well, child support's over, our kid's basically about to be on her own. She's a senior now. Let her, if you want to do something for her because you were gone, do that. So now I send her money every month, a decent amount of money every month for her to save up for school or whatever she wants to do in lieu of traditional child support because her mom's not going to take money from me she doesn't need. I think she would rather see me pay people back than anything because they're doing okay now. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very big on amends process and amending relationships. That's why I was asking about the investors. I also believe in writing things the right way moving forward.
Yeah.
Whether it's save a life, like your child, your daughters, showing them the right way. I mean, she's an adult now, right? So it's not.
He's 17. She'll be 18 in August.
Okay. But basically you can't really go through the court system anymore. She's going to be an adult very soon. So, yeah, I have a daughter. That's why. And I would do anything for my daughter.
Me too.
Me and my ex, we're great now. We're best of friends now, but it wasn't like that in the very beginning. And I did everything fighting in court to make sure I had 50% custody of my daughter. So I'm big on that.
I'll tell you, one of the things that kind of resonated with me as far as my daughter goes is when I was back in prison this time, I was, shortly after I got there, I was put with at the time, 19-year-old kid 19-year-old autistic kid who had been through 5 other roommates. And, my case manager knew I was a little more level-headed and I guess I kind of liked to help people at that time too. And so he stayed with me for the entire duration of this last prison stay. And he had the same issue. He had his mom, his stepmom that was being the one that raised him, and his biological mom. And, his stepmom was not talking to him because of the charge in the prison and all this kind of stuff. And he was having a really hard time, and he wanted to call his biological mom, and he was so nervous about it. And I was like, listen, I told him, my daughter hasn't talked to me in a couple of years. I still send her letters all the time, hasn't answered one of them, and I'm still sending them birthday cards, everything. But I'm going to tell you this, if I'm 60 and my kid calls and needs help, regardless, she's going to get the help. And it's the same way it's going to be with your mom. And so he finally got the courage up to call his mom. And now a year later, they're like the best of friends. And she's the only one that's supporting him. So, I believe in that too. And I think that's eventually what's going to happen with me and my kid. Because I just have to show her that we made an agreement that I would help her do this to get ready for college this next summer, because she's a senior this year. And I think she really wants to see me actually follow through.
Great. Make sure you follow up with that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, that's important. So I have a question. What is your take on Ian Bick?
Have you done Ian Bick?
Have I done Ian Bick? Yes, I did.
You've been on his show or what?
I was on his show.
You really want to know?
Sure. Air it out.
Okay, so here's the deal with me and Ian Bick. Me and Ian Bick both went to federal prison, and we were both on Generation Hustle. He was episode 2. I was episode 9. We actually both started on TikTok the same week in 22. He blew up. I didn't, because I went back to federal prison. And I'm really proud of him. He's done a really great job. He's got a great personality. I love some of his skits are right on. Some of them aren't. But did you go to prison?
No, I did not. No.
So as far as Ian goes, he tells a story about paying for protection at Fort Dix Low. The roommate that I was just talking to you about, we were at Butner, which is a medical facility, and because I have medical issues, and I will just call him JJ because he's okay with that. JJ, my old roommate, his job at Butner is to push a 60-year-old man in a wheelchair around the compound. He gets paid for that. That 60-year-old man used to live 2 doors down from Ian at Fort Dix
Low.
At Fort Dix Low. Ian Bick had to pay for protection at Fort Dix Low because he made himself a target. Because every time he opens his mouth, he talks about, at 18, I owned these clubs. I had all these people. I could pay them thousands of dollars. I made all this money. When you get into prison, especially when you're little like me and Ian, and you're white collar like me and Ian, and wear glasses like me and Ian, you need to shut the fuck up, keep your head down, be respectful, and stay in your own lane. Okay? And because he didn't do that, he had to pay for protection. Not any other way. And when this really fucked me up is I had somebody call me who was going to Fort Dix, who was a white collar guy who'd been working with me for months. And he said, I just saw a video. How much money do I need to keep on my books so I can pay for protection? You don't have to pay for protection if you just do what I've told you to do. But no, Ian's a good guy. He had to pay for protection. How much do I have to put on? You're not going to have to pay for protection. Guy gets to Fort Dix. He's like, man, everybody told me Ian wouldn't shut up about how much money he had. Well, have you said how much money did you steal? No. Have you ever had any problems with that? No. So, that was basically the gist of my beef with Ian Bick. And then he does a lot of skits where it's just, I don't know why it irritates me so bad, but he did another skit. He's doing skits now in the cell, and some of them are cute and some of them are great, but he does one where he goes to his wall phone and he calls his dad and tells his dad to pay the guy who's extorting him and to call the guy on his contraband cell phone. Well, rule number 1, when you have a contraband cell phone, is to never mention it on the wall. When a call is, when you call American Airlines and the call is being recorded for quality assurance purposes, it's because it's being recorded so you don't fraud anybody. When they tell you the call is being recorded and monitored in prison, it's being recorded and monitored, every single call. And like, you would never do that. And then Ian he did a video where he talks about, why do you have to pay for protection? Because he was doing this and doing that and doing this. Well, when you hear my story, I started off at FPC Montgomery, which was a camp. Now, Ian couldn't go to camp off the rip because he was too young, but I wasn't. He would have started at Evansville if he wasn't so young. I started at camp, and after 2.5 years of having cell phones in camp, somebody snitched on me, and I got moved to Forest City Low in Arkansas, and then I got caught on another cell phone, moved to Forest City Medium. And because I left medium custody when I left in February of 22, I went back to medium custody. So I went to Butner Medium, and then I worked my way down to Butner Low. But I've gotten caught with cell phones. Before I came to Jesus, and I say that figuratively, but before I came to my senses, I was the cigarette plug. I mean, I knew about smuggling cigarettes. I knew about smuggling cell phones. At FPC Montgomery, we were getting takeout every Saturday night. I knew all this stuff. I never had to pay for protection, ever. And that, for some reason, really rubbed me the wrong way. And then, before I started beefing with him online, I wrote him an email. We were still cordial, asking, did he want me on his podcast? I think I have a compelling story. I mean, the McAfee part should make it interesting, to say the least, and everything else I've done. Now I've been on 2 feature documentaries. So he completely ignored my emails. Okay, fine, I don't care. Then, one thing that we didn't really get into that we probably don't have time to get into is irrelevant. Now, I came out of the closet in prison. I'd been gay my whole life, basically. I went to an all-boys school, and I'm married to somebody that I was in federal prison with in Montgomery, who's a really great guy. And he was there for drug charges. And I'm sure if you know Ian Bickton, you know JD DeLay, right?
I know JD, yeah.
Okay. So Ian and JD are like this, which is cool. In June, my husband's mother died suddenly. And my husband is a meth addict, and he'd been clean for going on 4 years. And I needed help.
This was this past June?
This year.
Okay.
I needed help desperately. How do I help my husband get through this time so we don't go back to the meth? And I know, because we BS all the time and we go back and forth in comments all the time, that JD is from Daytona, a recovery specialist. And if he can't help me, he's got to know somebody in Daytona that can help me, because we're in Daytona. I need help right now. So I get in JD's comments. I get in JD's DMs. I text JD. I have other people reaching out to JD. I know Ian and JD are tight, and I know Ian's email address because we've emailed back and forth before. And this is before I went online and started a war with Ian. I wrote Ian an email, like, heartfelt, bottom from my heart, like, I need JD's help right now on a substance issue. This is basically what's going on. Please, I have some money. I can pay, whatever. I need his help right now. I need to do this so that we don't have to go through the law. And I mean, my husband hadn't done anything yet, but it could have gotten really messy. And I never heard back from them. So at that point in time, it was fuck them both, and it was on.
Mm. So a few things. Well, yeah, you laid out a lot there. Number one, I do want to say, I understand. So I'm 7 years clean and sober. I know what it is when an addict or an alcoholic relapses and the severity of it.
Right.
So I understand you sounding the alarm left and right, like beefs, no beefs, whatever. I need help. I don't know about that situation, so I can't speak on that situation from their standpoint. But I do know that JD does give a lot of money on a monthly basis to recovery centers, giving back to the community from a drug perspective and like a drug recovery, addiction recovery perspective. So I know he does do a lot.
I know he does too. I mean, at this point,
in terms of what had happened, if the email went through, if it didn't go through, I don't know. I can't speak on that. I know JD. JD is a friend of mine. So the JD that I know, I don't think he would do that if he did see it. And I know he sees online beefs as petty online beefs. And when a push comes to shove,
let me interrupt you.
Save life. Yeah, go ahead.
He did a video back to my video, and then he pulled it down, which I've never seen him do before. So I respect him for that. And I've been in his comments because there's a lot of stuff that he says that really resonates with me. Me and him are on the same page with people that touch kids. The reason that I was so adamant about speaking with JD specifically was because he was in the space and he was from Daytona. Mm-hmm. That was the key part. Like, I wasn't expecting JD to come from Washington or from Oregon or wherever he's at now to rescue me and my husband.
100%.
I figured he knew somebody in Daytona to pick up the phone real quick and say, call this person.
So I will say, again, I'm not discrediting your story. Right. There are two sides to every story, three sides always to every story. But the JD that I know, if I called JD right now and I said, dude, I'm about to relapse, or if I said my third cousin is about to relapse, I know for a fact he would do whatever it takes. So I can't speak on it, but I did ask you what your beef was with Ian, and, really quick to go back to when you were talking about in prison, he was a 22-year-old kid that went away to prison. Me at 22 going into prison, I know Ian. Ian has a good heart. Ian is actually one of my very good friends, and it's fine. There is no beef. We're all cool. We're all, at the end of the day, we're all cool with one another. And Ian going away at 22 years old, I probably would have done the same thing. He had an ego. I had an ego at 22. I think 99% of 22-year-olds have an ego, and I get it. But did it impact you directly?
Impact me directly?
Yeah. Him saying that he paid for protection when in fact he paid for protection because he said he made all this money from the clubs.
No, it did not impact me directly. But I did have a client call me freaking out because Ian said he had to pay for protection.
And then you just told him, no, you don't have to pay for protection. And your client probably went on about his day, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, at the end of the day, I totally get what you're saying. But also remember, I said I had a 19-year-old autistic with me. So I know, I know other kids who've been to prison, and a lot of his friends are kids that went to prison that I talked through, and I've never seen it like that, I'm also 20 years older than Ian probably.
So you're thinking but from a different...
but that's it. And he's done very well. A lot of his stuff is, like I said when I was telling you, a lot of his stuff is great and some of it's funny as hell. But there's just some things that are just out there that aren't historically correct and couldn't be even from his perspective.
Yeah. Listen, we all have, there are two sides to everything. I get it. The Ian and JD that I know. So Ian called, FaceTime me for my daughter's birthday to say happy birthday to my daughter. The Ian that I know, he helped me get started with my,
that's awesome.
I was down and out and he showed me the ropes and he didn't owe me anything.
In JD's original video, he's like, I don't just, I forget what he said. I mean, he took it down, but he was just like, people don't have to pay me to talk to them about prison. They can just use the internet. Great. I mean, people don't pay me to talk about prison. In some cases, I am the internet that people see because I have over 1,000. My videos are a whole lot different. Mm-hmm. And then JD's a whole different person than Burner and those guys.
I agree.
JD does do the hurrah, hurrah, and all this.
His personality, dude.
His personality is hurrah, hurrah, but he's not the I killed. Listen, I always say when I talk about what I do specifically versus everybody else's, I made a concerted effort not to do war stories. I could tell war stories because I've been to medium federal prisons. I've seen some shit in my life that a lot of people have never seen. And I didn't go that route. And JD does sometimes, but he backs it. If he's like, you're going to go to, if you're touching kids, you're going to go to prison and get killed. But here's why. Because this guy's, raped 7 kids. Of course he's going to get fucked up when he gets to prison. And that's what happens. So it's JD's factually correct, which is good by me. Yeah. And like he did take that video down, and there's some stuff, there's a couple that I've commented on where he's commented back to me where, yeah, I know, but like, that was it. You asked me and that was what happened.
No, I appreciate you sharing all that. Look, man, at the end of the day, you really should go on Ian's show.
I'd love to.
I do believe he sent you back an email. I do.
I haven't seen it, but I'll check.
I do believe he sent you back an email, and I would love for you guys to go on, and because both at the end of the day, everyone's cool, man. Like,
I told do you know the Get a Grip guys?
Yeah, of course.
I did. The Get a Grip was the first show I did.
Yeah, Get a Grip in Ohio.
Yeah, I flew on my own dime. I told them they wanted me and Ian to get together too. I would go there. I'd go fly out and talk to JD. I'd love to talk to JD one day because JD does some really good stuff.
He does. He's done a lot of good stuff for me. Again, I know what you're saying if that story is in fact true, but I also know JD personally, and I don't think he would just leave an addict behind like that.
Well, at this point in time, if I ever had another problem, I could just text you and be like, "Hey, listen,
hey, there you go.
I'm in,
I'm in Jupiter.
My husband and I will be back physically together in the summer, but I go back and forth to see him in Daytona. But if we ever had a problem in Daytona, I could just tell him that. But yeah, cool. That's that whole thing. It's not a big thing anymore, really.
No. Well, Kyle, thank you so much.
No, thank you, man.
I appreciate you coming on. Plug your TikTok and plug whatever socials you want to plug.
Everywhere that I can be, I'm federalprisontips.com.
Federalprisontips.com. Well, Federal Prison Tips is your handle.
I'm Federal Prison Tips on TikTok, Insta, YouTube, Facebook. But listen, when we did that Red Note thing for like a day because everybody thought TikTok was going away, I couldn't be Federal Prison Tips. So I am only Federal Prison on Red Note. So if TikTok ever goes away, I'll be Federal Prison on Red Note.
There you go.
But the other thing that I wanted to really quickly say as far as what we do now is when, they had both of them had kind of said that I get paid to talk about prison where you could find this stuff out online. A lot of the stuff you find out online, I'm the provider of the content. What people get from me is a firsthand look at questions that I had when I was going through. Like, nobody can tell you how to do the First Step Act the way that I did to get 33 months off their sentence, but me. But at the same time, we also have a whole post-conviction works out of our business, and we've freed between clemency, early termination, and actually getting people out of prison. Since I've started this in April of 2024, we've freed over 200 people.
That's great, man.
Freed them. So
that's great. Well, thank you again for coming on.
No problem, man. It was a lot of fun.